Please be seated. Now I'd like to invite any of our young people to come forward for the message for all ages. So once upon a time, there was a king who was very selfish. Now, probably most kings are pretty selfish, but this one was really, really selfish. He had grown very, very rich from all of the taxes that he forced his subjects to pay. Every year he got richer, and every year they got poorer. Now, the king lived in a marvelous palace that had been built by all of his servants. But the servants themselves, they lived in these little huts. They didn't even have any heat, and the only light that they had came from candles. The king always had this delicious food to eat. As a matter of fact, he had so much food that he couldn't eat it all, so a lot of it just got thrown in the garbage. It was wasted. And in the meantime, the people that actually grew the food out in the fields, they barely had enough to eat because it all went to the palace. They usually got just one meal a day, and that was usually just beans and rice. But the king really, he didn't care. He had what he wanted, and that was fine with him. But one day, this stranger came to the palace gates. He was a hunter, and he had with him a dog. Not just any dog, but a really, really big dog, an enormous dog. What's the biggest dog you can think of? Great Dane? Wolf? Saint Bernard? A wolf, not a Chihuahua. All right, yeah. Well, this was a really big dog, and the king really liked dogs, and he was really interested in this dog. And to give you an idea about how big he was, that's a scary dog, isn't it? Yeah, he's a big dog. So anyway, the king was really interested in this dog, and he wanted to learn more about the dog and the hunter, so he invited them to stay in the palace. But this was no ordinary dog. He was not only really, really big, he had, when he opened his mouth, a really big bark. And it was not a very agreeable bark. It actually was a very disturbing bark. And the problem with this dog is that he didn't bark just once or twice. Once he started barking, he wouldn't stop. Well, the king began very quickly, as this dog was barking and making all this commotion, to get kind of concerned. And he asked the hunter, "Why is your dog barking so much?" "Well, probably," said the hunter, "because he's hungry." "Absolutely, because he's hungry." "Well then," said the king, "let's feed him." So he ordered this big plate of meat to be brought to the dog. And the dog just snarfed it up in nothing flat. And then he started barking again. "Bring more meat," said the king. A second plate of meat disappeared as quickly as the first. Dog started barking again. More and more plates of meat were brought for the dog, and he would eat it all, but he would continue to bark. "What's wrong?" said the king. "You're going to have to leave here. We can't have this dog barking all the time." "Well, we're not going to do that," said the hunter, "because, Your Majesty, we have been sent here by a power even greater than yours." And the king was kind of frightened when he heard this. He'd never been spoken to like that before, but he could tell, looking into the hunter's eyes, that he was not to be taken lightly. So after a few moments, he asked the hunter, "Will anything satisfy your dog's hunger?" "Oh, yes," said the hunter, "but I don't think it's going to be easy for you to give it to me." He would be satisfied if he was given the flesh of his enemies to eat. The flesh of his enemies. "Well, who are the dog's enemies?" asked the king. "I will find them. We'll make sure that the dog can eat their flesh." "His enemies," the hunter continued, "are those who keep the people of this country hungry. Those who are hoarding all the food that is grown, not dividing it with the people that actually grow that food. Your Majesty, as long as there are any people in your kingdom who are hungry and in want, the dog is going to continue to bark." Well, on hearing the hunter say this, the king was even more frightened. And he was confused because it had never occurred to him that he was doing anything wrong. He had supposed that the people in his kingdom, they were supposed to do whatever he wanted, that nobody's happiness counted except his own. "Oh my," he said to himself, "what am I going to do?" He called his advisors. And they huddled, and they talked about it among themselves. And then they came back to the king, and they said, there's only one of two things you can do. You can kill the dog, but I think that'd be rather hard. He's pretty intimidating. Or you can feed everybody in your kingdom. And so the king immediately said, put all the servants in my palace to work. Go to the storerooms. Get out bags of wheat and corn and rice. Go to my cold storage. Get all the meat that's there. Go into my garden. Get the fruit off of the trees. Pull up the vegetables. Take all of this produce, all of this grain and this meat to the towns and villages of my kingdom. And the servants immediately hopped to, did as the king required them to. And pretty soon you could hear all this shouting and all this laughter and all this merrymaking all throughout the palace, because the people were really happy to be doing this for each other and for the people out in the towns and villages. They were so happy and so engaged in this work that they forgot to listen to the barking dog. All day long, and for many days after that, the carts rolled out of the palace to all the towns and villages of the kingdom. And then one day, everybody had been fed, and the dog curled up beside the king's throne, and he was quiet. And the king, the selfish king, had learned his lesson. Now, there's a little moral to this story. You know, we've got something inside us, a little voice inside of us. It's called our conscience. And when we're being selfish and when we're not being kind and fair with other people, it starts barking at us. And our conscience won't stop barking at us until we stop thinking about ourselves and reach out to others. And so when you hear that little barking inside, you know it's time to be a little kinder than you already are. So that's our story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you will also enjoy your classes today.